Lauded for virtuosic musicality as much as technical precision, the United States Marine Band kicks off the symphonic portion of our Beethoven at 250 celebration, presenting Beethoven's symphonies in unique and rarely heard arrangements for chamber ensemble. Never has Beethoven's monumental Eroica sounded so intimate and colorful as in this performance for flute and piano trio. A transcription for wind nonet of the Symphony No. 7 reveals new depths in the work's inherent lyricism and playfulness. I would like to now welcome and introduce two members of the President's own United States Marine Band who are performing on this concert. First, we have Gunnery Sergeant Karen Johnson. Concertmaster Gunnery Sergeant Karen Johnson joined the President's own Marine Chamber Orchestra in March 2011 and was appointed concertmaster in October 2015. Then playing on the nonet, we have French horn player Staff Sergeant Rebecca McLaughlin, who joined the President's own United States Marine Band in November 2016. We also have two special guests from the music division. Jane Cross, who is a music archivist at the library and was the former chief librarian of the United States Marine Band and retired last year after 22 years of service. And then finally, we have Loris Schissel, who is a music specialist in the music division. So I'd like to give the floor now to Loris.
My question is, I'd like to know what kind of adjustments had to be made to the tempi. We always talk about Beethoven's outlandish metronome markings, and I was wondering, how did you folks approach that when you were rehearsing and exploring these transcriptions?
Definitely. All right, I will start. In the Beethoven 7, I know it's a piece that all of us have heard for years. I know I've recognized it since I was a little kid. And so we definitely wanted to maintain all of the tempos that we were so used to hearing, while also performing the parts the best that we can. They're so intricate, especially for our upper woodwinds. And so the tendency was to slow down, was to be able to play everything instead of like a string player that can just toss it off and make it sound so effortless. For a woodwind player, for a brass player, oh my gosh, we're just trying to keep up. So trying to maintain the tempo and also not speed up, because we wanted to be similar to what everyone is used to hearing for Beethoven 7. So try to keep it right in the pocket. Also, on the original parts, there are a lot of tempo markings written in. And on the arrangement I have, there are no metronome markings. It's just poco sostenuto, and then it doesn't have that actual number next to it. So we took our interpretation as best we could from what we were used to hearing.
Yeah, same. We also did not have any of the normal or the markings that we're used to in our score for the piano quartet that we're doing with the Eroica Symphony. So we likewise were playing everything as best we could, representing the Eroica as we have done it previously. So really very few things have changed. And I'm sure we'll talk about this later, just so much of the voicing and just condensing everything down into only 4 voices. That's probably the biggest difference, and that everybody will soon hear.
Thank you. Are there any other adjustments that you all have had to make to accommodate things like trying to breathe?
Yes. There are a lot of moments where I've turned to the principal horn player and said, do you mind if I sneak in a breath here? Is it okay if I take this breath or this breath? Especially in the 4th movement in particular, it seems like there's no break. And I know our librarians were so used to us coming downstairs and saying, can you photocopy another page? Because we just don't even have time to turn the page, much less breathe. So we're trying our best to still play the part as it can be played and fit in a breath whenever there's doubling, whenever there's a chance to, so that we don't miss out on anything, but then you can still play at the volume you need to play. And that's especially true in my part of the 4th movement, and I think the other instrumentalists felt it throughout the whole symphony.
So yeah, with this kind of reduction, this kind of transcription, you've really had to be even more collaborative in your approach to playing the music.
Definitely. That's an excellent way to put it. And in such a small ensemble, it was really nice that just the 9 of us could all share exactly how we felt about this piece, our experiences playing this piece in the orchestra setting, and how that now translates to turning it into this kind of different animal, but still maintaining all of the colors and sounds that we're so used to hearing. It definitely was collaborative, and I loved that, especially right now. It was so nice to sit down and play something like this that is so familiar and then new and different at the same time.
Karen, have the strings had to make any similar adjustments? I know not for breathing necessarily, but any other closer collaborations that this sort of reduction would inspire?
Definitely. There's so many different things that we've had to change around. I think one of the biggest differences for me is that I am so used to playing this in its original setting. And so when I see my part in front of me, you know, perhaps the pianist or the flutist has my part. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, what? I've played this piece probably 10 times or more, at least performed it. But I feel like I'm reading a whole different piece of music. And I'm like, what? Why am I in the wrong spot? What's going on here? Because so much of it is muscle memory for me as a violinist. And then I sit in front of this, you know, part that's been, you know, fiddled with, so to speak. And it looks like a completely different part, but then you hear all the voices playing together, the 4 voices, and you're like, well, there it is. Yeah, that's Beethoven's music. It's just I'm not playing what I'm used to playing. So a lot of the time I'm like, I find myself having to switch my brain out of muscle memory and going into like, I actually have to count this part because I'm not sure where I come in anymore because I'm playing completely different role. So it's kind of funny, but also it's been really intriguing in a way too, because it's made me hear the piece and feel the piece very differently than I'm used to. I'm so used to feeling it just in the role of, you know, in the first violin section. So, but to feel it like, oh, perhaps I'm taking on the viola line or clarinet line, or, you know, I'm doing very different. I'm kind of changing my character all the time. And so it's very interesting, this particular way of playing the piece.
Oh, fascinating.
In the performing edition that you have, are we going to hear the complete symphony, or have there been adjustments made to the edition?
My part is Beethoven's Third Symphony. It is from top to bottom, just same amount of music, same themes, same transitions, all the same materials, just in a different way, in a different version.
Yeah, slightly different story for the Beethoven 7. I think we're used to all hearing it as around 42 minutes in length, and this one is about 32. So you can imagine some things have been cut out. There are a couple repeats that we don't do, and in general, the arrangement, I think the arranger realized there are only so many colors that you can use in an ensemble like this. And if you just add a voice in the orchestra, oh, that changes it. Then you add another voice. It might be the same material repeated and repeated and repeated. But in this setting, you can only repeat it so many times before it becomes a little stagnant. So I think they realized, let me cut some of this out and make it new material, new voices, new colors, and then just move on. Instead of going back and repeating those last 100 measures or the last 50 measures, like often we see in that part. And I think that's true in every movement, especially I know in the first movement, you'll realize, oh, I'm not going back all the way to the vivace. And the fourth movement, oh, I'm not repeating these specific phrases over and over. And so it is a little bit shorter, but you still have all of the material. It's all there, even if it's not as many times.
Mm-hmm. Does it still play as well as when you play it in the full version that way? I mean, the obvious question is, did you miss the missing parts?
I personally, I thought that, okay, this is what I'm used to hearing. This is what I relate to as Beethoven 7, but it's also so different to hear clarinets that are playing the string parts and oboists that are playing the flute solos. You just have to readjust, just like Karen said. Oh, I'm a different role now. I am now a cellist instead of my horn player self. And I do think that made it different enough that I felt, okay, this is Beethoven 7, but moving on. Going to the next thing.
So you
What
both-
was? Can you repeat the question again? Because I couldn't remember the original question. What was the question?
I forget the very, very first question.
No, the one you just asked Becky.
Oh, it wouldn't really apply to you because for the third, there are no cuts in that one.
Oh
Yeah.
no.
Mr.
Yeah.
Hummel, yeah, because he had to do it with Beethoven looking over his shoulder. So,
Exactly.
so no cuts allowed.
You both touched on something interesting now, where you're talking about covering other parts, and we're hearing parts not in the places we're used to hearing them. Do you want to talk about any specific moments in these pieces where the listener might think, "Well, that's not the instrument I'm used to hearing play right there"?
Contrabassoon. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. We were using, for anyone who isn't familiar, 2 clarinets, 2 horns, 2 oboes, and then 3 bassoons, one of which is a contrabassoon. And that is our bass voice. And it might be a little shocking to not hear a timpani play these rhythmic parts, but hear it on contrabassoon. And then also hear, his name is Staff Sergeant Stephen Rudman, just wail on some of these parts that are just as fast and flying by as all of the other instruments, only octaves below them. It's fascinating. And so that really stands out in my mind as, okay, that's unique. Here we go. This is something entirely different, but also I'm just so drawn to it. I get to sit next to him and really pay attention now to things that I wouldn't have heard or that wouldn't have stood out otherwise that are so interesting. So I just love it. I think it's great.
Yeah, for the Eroica, actually, maybe we took a little bit of liberty because of the beginning sections of the second and the third movement are very strings. They start with strings, and this melody of the second movement starts with the violins playing, and Hummel had given it to the piano. And we made a little bit of an executive decision that we were going to keep the violin playing. And I hope no one gets terribly upset. But I guess there's so many differences in the entire thing that we actually, as a quartet, made a decision that I was going to also continue to play those melodies on the violin, as well as the beginning of the scherzo, which is a very famous excerpt for first violin. And they had also just given it to the piano. So no wonder if Beethoven was looking over Mr. Hummel's shoulder, he said, well, I just want to play the whole thing. So it's a very, very piano-centric score. And we have a brilliant pianist playing. His name is Christopher Schmidt. Staff Sergeant Schmidt, he's brilliant, and he's doing an amazing job just covering so many voices in the piano, and basically the strings and flute are there for color. And we also we take on our various important roles, but it is a very piano-centric piece, and he's playing it brilliantly.
Yeah, that actually reminded me of one more section that you just go, wait, that's not right, but okay. It sounds great. There's in the recap in the first movement, instead of hearing the full orchestra come back in with this melody that we're so used to, it's just a clarinet solo by himself. And yeah, I saw all of your faces. It is a bit shocking because you aren't expecting a solo instrument to take on that role, but we make it work, and you still hear all of the familiar things. It's just that instrumentation is so different. So that's another part that definitely stood out to answer your question.
Wow, I can't wait to hear this now. It sounds absolutely fascinating, especially that contrabassoon. And Karen, I think you helped me as a listener by taking some of those lines back. I think it'd be a little less jarring.
It was actually very selfish of me to take them back. Didn't feel right about giving them away.
One thing I think we might add here, only because the audience might not be aware of this, was these arrangements like this of the symphonies, Beethoven symphonies, but also of opera, overtures, Mozart's time. The idea of arranging symphonic music for smaller forces was really the great YouTube of the day, because it afforded people an opportunity, since there were so few symphony orchestras, to allow people to make this music oftentimes in their living room. And this was really the way that this music was disseminated that way. We see that either in these small versions for harmony music or chamber music, or even the piano four-hand arrangements of these things. It really was a way of exposing people's, I'm sure that more people heard Beethoven's music in these smaller versions this way than they would have with a symphony orchestra. So it's really a very practical method. And of all the readings I've done of all of these composers, Mozart in particular, if he didn't do the arrangement himself, he had a buddy of his named Mr. Wendt who would make the harmony music versions of these. So it's really a great tradition of getting the word out on your music.
Definitely, it makes it more accessible.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of it too, at least when you were talking about especially the third arrangement, we're so used to hearing our large 90, 100 piece symphony orchestras play these pieces. And then the early music groups came in and they scaled these pieces back, and everyone said, oh my God, how transparent the music became that way. And this is even taking it back historically to a period where it really does make it transparent. And I'm always find it so remarkable that music that we're used to hearing 100 musicians play is still sounds so good with just 4 or 5 musicians playing it. You can't beat good music.
That is such a good point, because playing this piece in with 4 people versus 90 has revigorated my own understanding of the piece, because you take out all of the colors and the largeness of the piece, and you're left with almost just the structure of it, the pure compositional structure of it. And then it's like you can't get away from how brilliant it is, because it's just that's just its basest, most foundation of what's going on in the music, and there's nothing to distract from it. There's no timpani, there's no brass, there's no full force sound, and it's been a really interesting study for me, because I've never heard it this way, and I've now playing it. Probably when I come back to it, we'll play it in a different way, having done it in this version. So I've been really grateful for this chance to play it with 4 people.
We were actually joking in rehearsal, if he could have reduced it any more, he wouldn't have, this arranger, because we covered all of the parts. Even if there was a tambourine, it's in there. So we definitely feel like everything is covered, and the skeleton is there, the structure is there, everything's there, even though it's reduced so much from its large size and the sound that you're used to hearing down to just these 9 musicians.
The one thing I think that it kind of takes us full circle this way is that this music, especially for the harmony music, which is really just a very small wind band, is really the genesis of the United States Marine Band. When this band started, unlike later when we think of the sort of golden age of bands, which were brass bands at the time, the United States Marine Band was basically a harmony music ensemble, pairs of oboes, bassoons, maybe a keyed bugle, contrabassoon, or a serpent for the low end of the sound that way. But it really is, that's the traditions of the Marine Band go right back to the times, literally, of Beethoven that way. So it's very nice seeing this ensemble, as in the Marine Band, kind of come back to their roots that way too.
Yep.
I feel like we have to owe a lot of credit to these arrangers, Hummel and Sedlak, for making this music possible for us to play during a pandemic time when a lot of orchestras are looking to play with reduced forces and they're looking for reductions and transcriptions. Even without a pandemic, these transcriptions, I think, would have made it possible for the Marine Band to bring these pieces live on stage in Coolidge Auditorium, because it is not a space that it can accommodate huge forces like Beethoven originally intended. So thank goodness for these transcribers, these arrangers, for making these works possibly accessible to us in all sorts of situations.
Absolutely.
Definitely. I think one of the reasons why it was in a different key was to make it accessible to an oboist to be able to play all those flute parts. I think that's why it was moved down a step for the first, second, and fourth movements. And the third is the same key. And playing in a different key is, for this piece, as a horn player, really interesting because it's one of those excerpts that everyone knows and has under their fingers. And I know Karen was saying it's just muscle memory. And so for us, it is kind of muscle memory to play that wailing part at the end of the first movement all the way up to that high B natural. To start on an A, you do kind of have to adjust a little bit, but it's something we're so used to doing and happy to do when we play orchestral arrangements. If they're in a different key, you just switch gears and do that. So we're happy to do it, but it is nice that it's accessible for those different instruments, for different configurations, and I love that we make it work.
I might add here too is that here at the Library of Congress we have the Francis Scala collection, who was the conductor of the Marine Band going back well into the middle part of the 19th century. And within his collection are some of these transcriptions, especially a little bit later, but of music of Carl Maria von Weber for slightly expanded harmony music, which he used those arrangements and adapted it to his own instrumentation that he had for the Marine Band. So there's a tradition of arrangers arranging the arrangements that way, and particularly a nice connection with the president's own.
I love this concept that we're not used to, because we are surrounded by music in 2020, in 19th century. We have been surrounded by music from infancy. It just is everywhere. And so the idea that, a couple of 100 years ago, that there was no way for most people to hear any of this music except for these arrangements. And I love the fact that this is the way that people were able to hear music and to bring this art form to more people. So in a way, it's just a lot more democratic, a way of getting out music to everybody. And I love that the Marine Band has such a rich history of this. And I myself have done a violin concerto that was transcribed for band. It was a violin solo transcribed for band with band accompaniment, because that's what John Philip Sousa did. He took soloists, either singers or pianists or string players, with his band on the road. And so, yes, they couldn't hear the violin solo with an orchestra, but they could hear the violin solo with a band. And so I love how the band has a rich tradition of just taking what it has, but making this music accessible. This great music is accessible to everybody, that it, as much as possible.
You could use this as a tag. One of the great treasures of the Library of Congress here is our relationship, our rich relationship with the Marine Band that goes back to well into the 19th century, particularly into Mr. Sousa's time. Mr. Sousa did his research here at the library when he was compiling his national anthems, and a real rich collaborative relationship has existed probably since the 1880s up until this very concert this way of the Library of Congress working closely with the Marine Band and bringing our music that's on our shelves to life. And I think that's something not only special, but something that should be celebrated too.
Absolutely.